Not every hero arrives riding a white horse. Sometimes he appears with shoulders hunched over by time and eyes heavy with painful memories. Old Sheriff Hank McCallan, retired for 7 years, no longer expected to live great stories. But on that dry afternoon, when the sun barely allowed him to breathe and the dust of the road seemed to swallow the world, he saw something he could not ignore. A girl staggering alone, barefoot and covered in rags, in the middle of nowhere. She looked about 17. Her knees were bruised, her face was grimy with dirt, and she had a look that was a mix of fear and exhaustion. Hank slowly stopped his horse, watching from a distance. "Don't be afraid," he murmured, without getting out of the saddle. She backed away, her whole body shaking. The sheriff took off his hat, trying to look less threatening. That girl carried the kind of silence that only those who have fled death know, and he knew how to recognize that look. As the sun set behind the Wyoming hills, Hank held out his hand. She hesitated for a long moment, then, with tears in her eyes, took his calloused fingers. He didn't ask her name, not yet. He knew that sometimes names hurt more than memories. They walked back down the road slowly, the silence saying everything that didn't need to be said. An old man and a young woman, broken by the world, bound together by something invisible. "Let's take it easy. You're safe now," he whispered, almost as if talking to himself. The wind blew hard at that moment, raising dust and dry leaves around them. It was at that moment that Hank saw something hanging around the girl's neck, a small golden medallion. He couldn't explain why that made his spine shiver. Share this story to reach further, subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment telling me where you are listening from. I will be very happy to read each comment. When he arrived at the ranch, as she slept for the first time in days, Hank gently picked up the locket. His heart skipped a beat. It was the same locket he had buried with his wife 23 years ago, a one-of-a-kind gift made by a Denver artisan. There were only 2 like it, and one of them was with the woman he had loved to the end. What was this girl doing with him? That night, Hank didn't sleep. Sitting on the porch, a cup of coffee cooling beside him, he held the locket between his fingers as if it could answer the questions that were hammering at his mind. "It can't be," he repeated to himself, staring up at the starless sky. The memory of the funeral, the pale wooden coffin, the silent farewell, it all came back in burning flashes. He opened the locket carefully. Inside was the same old photograph, his wife smiling young in a white dress faded by time. The same photo he had placed on the tomb with his own hands. His heart was racing. The girl had that object because someone had taken it, or because he had never been where he thought she was. He needed to know where she had come from. He needed to hear it from her own mouth. The next day, when the sun was barely touching the horizon, the girl woke up scared. She cried softly, like someone who was used to not being heard. "What's your name, young lady?" Hank asked gently, holding the medallion discreetly in her hand. She took a while to answer. Then, in a hoarse and almost muffled voice, she murmured, "Ellie." It was a name that cut through the silence like a razor, the name of the granddaughter he had never met. Breakfast was silent. Ellie ate slowly, as if she were about to be thrown out of the room at any moment. Hank watched her slowly, trying to piece together the strange and painful puzzle. Little by little, the story began to emerge, as if bleeding from within. "I ran away because he was going to lock me up again. I just wanted..." She trailed off, her lower lip trembling. "I just wanted to breathe, sir." And then, for the first time, Hank felt a pain he hadn't felt in a long time. The pain of recognizing in someone's words the shadow of his own wounds. He knew what it was like to lose someone to the prison of fear. But Ellie didn't know that she was sitting at the table with the one man who might be able to save her or sink her deeper. And in that locket, there were too many secrets to ignore. Hank stood up slowly, as if carrying the weight of a dormant truth. "You said Ellie, right? Ellie of what?" She swallowed hard. "Ellie McCallan." The coffee fell from his hand, shattering on the wooden floor. The past he had tried to bury. had just come knocking on his door, dressed in rags and asking for shelter. The name Ellie McCallan echoed in Hank's mind like a silent thunderclap. He backed away, leaning against the doorframe, trying not to fall apart. Inside, something was breaking into 1,000 pieces. Ellie was the daughter of his estranged son, John, who had disappeared after Hank's wife died, vowing never to return to this town. They had broken up over pride, anger, and unresolved hurts. And now, here was the granddaughter he'd never known existed. Hank had never wanted children after he lost his wife, Clara. John had been raised in strictness on a ranch where silence weighed more heavily than the wind. When the boy grew up and left, Hank thought it was fate taking its toll. He buried his pain under the dust of the mountains, and the years passed in silence. Now, his lost granddaughter appeared out of nowhere, carrying a locket that should have been buried underground. It was as if time had come to collect an old debt. That afternoon, Hank sat with Ellie on the porch. The sky was pale, with dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "Did you know who I was?" he asked hoarsely. Ellie shook her head. "No, I found this locket in Mom's suitcase. She said it was Grandma's. I ran away when Mom disappeared. I went from town to town. I thought maybe this place knew something." Each word was like a loose thread being stitched together in his memory. Ellie told her about the years she lived with her father, a broken, quiet man, drowning in alcohol and guilt. After her mother mysteriously disappeared, he withdrew even more into himself. He never spoke of his family, never mentioned his grandfather. When she ran away, she had nowhere to go. He carried the locket with him as a memento, or perhaps a compass, a symbol of something she never had, but wanted more than anything: a home. Hank felt a lump form in his throat. What could he do now? Part of him wanted to protect her with everything he had, but the other part, he was still the old, hardened sheriff, riddled with guilt and afraid to love again. Ellie's presence reopened all the barely healed wounds, and he knew no bullet hurts more than the one that comes from within. That night, as Ellie slept in the room that had once been her grandmother's, Hank sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the old picture of Clara. "Did you send her to me?" he whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "If you did, I'll take care of her. This time, I'll take care of her properly." And in that sacred silence of the room, between memories and promises, an old man decided to start over. The next few days were a slow adjustment. Ellie would wake up startled by every noise, as if she expected to be taken back to the place she had fled. Hank noticed how quickly she ate, as if each meal were her last. She avoided contact, but little by little the old sheriff began to break down the invisible wall. He didn't force questions, he just offered his presence, and sometimes that was all that was needed. Time seemed to slow down at the ranch. Mornings came with the smell of coffee and the sound of branches snapping in the wind. Ellie began helping with the horses. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable, but charged with meaning. One cold afternoon, Hank watched her braiding the mane of an injured mare. It was the same gesture Clara made when she was sad. "You have her hands," he said softly. Ellie smiled for the first time. As the days passed, small conversations began to emerge. She spoke of old songs she had listened to with her mother, of dreams that had been interrupted, of fears she could not name. Hank listened attentively without interrupting, and in his own way, he began to share too, stories of the ranch, of when he was young, and of how he had lost everything he loved because he could not listen. It was as if the two of them were sewing together a quilt of memories with patches of pain and hope. One morning, Ellie asked about her grandmother. Hank led her to a dusty old trunk in the attic. Inside were letters, old dresses, and a diary. "Did she write about me?" Ellie asked, her eyes brimming with tears. Hank nodded. "She dreamed of meeting you, even though she didn't know if she would ever come." Together, their hands flipped through the yellow pages, where Clara wrote with love and longing. Ellie clutched the diary to her chest, as if it were the hug she never received. The lonely ranch was beginning to come alive again. There was laughter in the house, footsteps running across the hardwood floor, the smell of cake baking in the oven. The ghosts were still there, but now they walked in peace. Ellie was beginning to trust, and Hank was beginning to forgive himself. But the past, as always, doesn't usually accept silence for long, and someone was about to show up. On the last night of that serene chapter, Hank saw from afar a horseman appear on the horizon, standing on the hill like an ancient shadow. His heart froze. The wind changed. The past was coming, and with it, truths that could destroy everything again. The figure standing on the hill was a shadow against the sunset, but Hank knew instantly who it was. The way he held the reins, the way he sat on the horse, even the heavy silence of his presence, it all spoke of the name he had avoided for decades. John McCallan, his son. Hank felt his body weigh down as if every bone were made of lead. The past hadn't just come back, it had ridden to his door. John dismounted slowly, without haste. Time had changed him. He was thinner, his face was lined with wrinkles, and his eyes were dull. Hank opened the door without saying a word. Father and son stared at each other for seconds that seemed like an eternity. Ellie, hearing footsteps, came into the room and froze when she saw the man. His eyes trembled. "Ellie, you're alive." His voice shattered like glass, but she didn't run to hug him. She just stepped back, afraid. "Did you come after her?" Hank asked, his voice cold, almost sharp. John nodded, his eyes still fixed on his daughter. "She disappeared. She left a note. I thought something bad had happened." Ellie, tears in her eyes, whispered, "I just wanted to be free, Dad. I couldn't take that silence anymore. That pain, that emptiness." John fell to his knees, his face in his hands. "I failed you, like he failed me." The confession crashed like thunder in the air. The silence in the room weighed more than any scream. Hank felt his chest ache at those words. "I failed you," he repeated in his mind. Generations breaking against each other like dry twigs in a storm. But now, with Ellie there, he had the chance to break that cycle. Enough of the pain, the silence, the running away. "She has the right to live without our ghosts," Hank said firmly, his eyes brimming with tears. John stood up slowly, facing his father. "Do you still blame me?" Hank hesitated. "I blame myself for everything. For your pain, for your mother leaving, for the ranch becoming a tomb. But now I want to do things differently." Ellie watched the scene with a heavy heart. For the first time she saw two men who had always seemed giants, now exposed, fragile, human, and that changed everything inside her. That night, father and daughter sat together on the porch. Their conversation was slow, punctuated by pauses and tears. Hank, from afar, heard a sound he had not heard in a long time, the possibility of forgiveness. But he knew that the newfound peace was fragile, because the past never arrives alone, and what was to come would put everything at risk. The clouds gathered over Eagle Creek, a portent of things to come. 3 days after John's arrival, a strange man appeared in town asking questions. Tall in a dusty dark suit and eyes as cold as winter, he claimed to be a detective. His name was Mr. Doyle, and he brought papers, records, and veiled accusations. Ellie was wanted. Someone had reported her for abandoning her home and suspected of taking valuables from her father's house. The news spread fast. In small towns, gossip carried like dry leaves on the wind. Hank was furious. John swore he hadn't called the police. "I would never do that. I just wanted to find her." But Mr. Doyle seemed to know too much. He insisted on seeing Ellie, questioning her. "She's a minor. She's in my custody now," Hank said firmly as he barred the man from his porch. But he knew he couldn't protect Ellie forever without taking on the system. Ellie listened to part of the conversation, her heart pounding. She thought she had escaped the outside world, but it had found her again. "Are they going to take me, Grandpa?" she asked, her voice breaking. Hank looked into her eyes, took her hand and said, "Not if you trust me. We'll get through this together." For the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone. The next morning, Hank and John drove to the town police station. Mr. Doyle was waiting for them with papers and a look of victory, but Hank demanded a fair hearing, using his old sheriff's influence. This girl didn't run away from a crime. She ran away from a broken life. The room fell silent. Doyle laughed. Prove it. And so Hank began to gather what was left of the truth. Letters from Ellie's mother, medical records, testimony from the town. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Ellie felt the pressure mounting. She saw her grandfather's struggle, her father's attempt to rebuild the destroyed bridge, and it all made her chest ache. Am I the reason for all this? She asked the mare she was brushing, but deep down she knew. She was the missing link that would heal the wounds of an entire generation. And even though she was afraid, she was ready to fight for it. The storm raged that night. Lightning tore through the sky, and the ranch seemed to shake with the thunder. Hank, John, and Ellie gathered for the first time in front of the fireplace. And there, between the heat of the flames and the cold of uncertainty, they promised that they would no longer let the past decide for them. The battle was just beginning, but now they were a family. At the hearing that would take place in a few days, Ellie's fate would be at stake. Hank knew this wasn't just a legal matter. It was the final fight to protect his granddaughter, redeem his son, and put the mistakes of the past to rest once and for all. But something didn't add up. Mr. Doyle's demeanor was too aggressive, as if there was something personal behind the proceedings. And then, one quiet afternoon, the truth came out. The local sheriff, an old acquaintance of Hank's, showed up at the ranch with a sealed envelope. I found this in the files. I think you'll want to see it. Inside was a never-delivered letter written by Clara before she died, a confession. It told of a painfully guarded secret. Her sister, who had disappeared in her youth, had become pregnant by a violent man and disappeared out west. That woman's son had grown up in an orphanage, and his name was Doyle. Hank was shocked. Mr. Doyle was somehow distantly related to Ellie, but there was no affection in his quest. It was spite, revenge for what he believed was a stolen past, a broken family. He wanted to take Ellie not to protect her, but to use her as a chip to settle a score with the McCallans, an old history tainted by neglect and resentment. Time was taking its toll again. Hank and John decided to act. The day before the hearing, they gathered everything they had: letters, evidence, testimonies. And that night, Ellie was called in for a final talk. "You have a right to know everything," Hank said, his voice breaking. He told her about Clara, about the letter, about Doyle. Ellie wept silently, feeling like the world was spinning too fast. But there, through her tears, she said, "I am no one's past. I am whoever you help me to be." At the hearing, the judge listened carefully to every word. Mr. Doyle tried to disqualify Hank and John, claiming neglect and abandonment. But Ellie stood up, looked everyone in the eye, and spoke in a firm voice. "I was not taken. I ran away to survive. My grandfather gave me what no one else ever gave me: peace." Then she handed the medallion to the judge, along with Clara's letter. "This is my roots, my name, my choice." The entire room fell silent. The decision was not quick, but that day, something changed. The masks fell, and the judge, at the end of the session, ruled Ellie would remain with Hank under legal guardianship, with regular visits with her father. Mr. Doyle was reprimanded for his unethical behavior and dismissed. Justice was not only served, it was felt. And when they left that courtroom, the sun shone again over Eagle Creek in a way it had not been seen in a long time. The ranch was celebrating. The neighbors, who had been suspicious before, now came to bring sweets, flowers, and words of support. "The girl is as strong as her grandmother," they said. And Ellie, for the first time in her life, felt like she belonged somewhere. The porch now had laughter at the end of the day. The kitchen smelled of life, and the walls of the old mansion heard stories again. John decided to stay for a while. He asked for a room in the barn to help with the horses and fix the old fences. It was his way of saying, "I'm trying." Hank was slowly allowing himself to smile again. The silences between father and son still existed, but now they were filled with respect, not resentment. Ellie, between them, was the bridge that rebuilt everything. With a simple gesture, with a loving look, she joined together what life had tried to tear apart. One day, while walking in the fields, Ellie came across an unlit campfire. It was the place where Hank used to sit alone in his lonely times. She sat down there and lit a match. The fire lit up her serene face. This is where he cried inside, she thought, and then she understood. Sometimes, in order to heal, you have to sit in the ashes and accept that they are part of your story too. One starry night, Ellie wrote in her grandmother's diary. She told it all. "Dear Clara, your locket has led me here. Thank you for guarding the way." And there, on the worn pages, she left a new chapter in the McCallan lineage. A chapter that began with pain, but blossomed into love, courage, and reconciliation. Just as Clara would have wished, the house was a real home now. Ellie rode horses, learned to farm, read books on the porch, and Hank, seeing her like this, felt something he hadn't felt in years: pride. He hadn't just saved a girl on that dusty road, he'd saved himself. And he'd discovered that even the hardest hearts could still blossom when touched with tenderness. But before the end, Hank invited Ellie for a carriage ride to the hill where Clara was buried. They brought flowers and the locket now with a new photo, the three of them smiling together. "She would like to see this," Hank said. Ellie nodded. "She can see it, Grandpa. She can see it." And so, amid the wildflowers and the gentle wind, hope was reborn in the Old West. As the seasons passed, the McCallan Ranch was no longer just an old wooden building in the middle of the Eagle Creek Plains. It became something much more powerful, a sanctuary of new beginnings. The place that once echoed with solitude now brimmed with life. Hank McCallan, the old sheriff who so many believed was beyond the reach of time, found his reason to wake up each morning. Ellie, the lost granddaughter who arrived like a shadow, now brightened the days with a silent strength and a sweetness that healed everything around her. And John, marked by mistakes and absences, began to write step by step a new story alongside his daughter, trying to reconquer with actions what the pain of the past took with unspoken words. Mornings at the ranch had a different flavor. Hank woke up early, but no longer to escape his own thoughts. He did so to make pancakes for Ellie, who laughed when she saw him getting all tangled up in the flour. The horses already recognized her footsteps, and even the animals seemed to calm down with her presence. The neighbors who had previously whispered about the runaway girl now called her the girl with the firm heart, because they saw up close how she transformed every corner into something alive. And around the house, flowers began to grow without anyone having planted them, as if the earth too felt the rebirth that was happening there. John found a corner of his own in the back of the barn, where he began to build furniture with his own hands. He didn't talk much, but his presence was now consistent. Little by little, he and Hank resumed conversations that had been interrupted for decades, often with just a look, a nod, or a simple "good job." Ellie was the link. She made them laugh at their own stubbornness, and at night they all gathered around the fire that had previously burned alone. What had been silence became the melody of crossed voices, a home at last. One day, while riding, Ellie and Hank came to the top of a distant hill where the countryside seemed to touch the sky. There, she dismounted and stood silently gazing into the distance. Hank noticed her posture, so much like Clara's, and without him saying a word, Ellie turned and asked, "Do you think she would be proud?" He walked over, put his hand on her shoulder, and answered in a trembling voice, "She already is. Since the first day you set foot on that road." The words hung in the air, as if the breeze itself carried them to where Clara could hear. The locket, now with the new photo inside, hung over Ellie's chest like a beacon. She no longer hid it. She wore it as a symbol of strength, history, and belonging. One day, Hank found her writing in a notebook. "I'm writing everything down, Grandpa, so no one will forget." He smiled, moved. "Then write it down beautifully, because this is worth more than gold." And she wrote. She wrote about the road, about the fear, about the hunger, about the tenderness she found, about the look in the eyes of that old man who didn't need words to save her, and about the chance the world gave her when everything seemed lost. On the last afternoon of that summer, Hank looked around the ranch, the orange sky painting everything with shades of farewell. The world had changed. Eagle Creek had changed. But most of all, he had changed. For the first time in many years, he felt peace. A quiet, deep peace. The kind that comes not from victories, but from forgiveness. He knew that life would still bring its pains, its doubts, but now he had something stronger. A family rebuilt with courage, tears, and love. A rebirth in the Old West that no one could ever take away from them. Sometimes fate weaves its tapestry with invisible threads. A forgotten locket, a glance on the road, a name whispered in the dark. And suddenly everything changes. The story of Hank McCallan and Ellie is not just a tale of the Wild West. It is a living reminder that there is always a way back. That no matter how much time has hurt, how much pain has been silenced, how many mistakes have accumulated, there is still room for reunion. There is still a chance to start over. Maybe you who are listening to this story right now are also holding onto a medallion, a memory, a pain, someone who has been lost in time. Maybe you are walking down a dusty road, tired, not knowing where it will lead. But know this, sometimes what we need is not a map. It is someone to reach out and say, "You are safe now." And when that happens, everything changes. Just like it changed for Ellie, just like it changed for Hank. This story also reminds us that the scars we carry are not signs of weakness, but of survival. That love can indeed span generations, even when silenced. That an aging man can be a hero to a broken young woman. And that a girl in rags can, with her silent courage, rekindle hope in hearts that had given up on feeling. It all starts with a step, a choice, a truth spoken at the right time. If this story touched your heart, I ask, share. Share it with someone who needs hope, who needs to remember that there is redemption. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our stories. Send this video to someone on WhatsApp, someone who needs to hear that there is still love in this world. And please leave a comment where you are listening from. I read each one with affection, and this helps me to continue telling these stories that rescue what is most beautiful in the human soul. And if you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for allowing this story to take up residence within you. May Eagle Creek and the McCallan Ranch be etched not as fiction, but as a reminder that even at the end of the road, there can always be a beginning. See you in the next story. Until then, hold on tight to your medallion and don't give up on the road.